SCA and when?
Okay. So I always say that I started in martial arts when I was 7. I saw the first Karate Kid movie and loved it and asked for martial arts lessons for my birthday. And so that's how I started. I just never stopped. So I was doing Taekwondo and Western boxing. And in college, I started fencing. And one of my music teachers pulled out this helmet and was like, "Oh, you fence, I do this." And it was actually blunted steel fighting, but it was still the medieval combat. And I had been fascinated with knights and armor my whole life. I loved Tolkien. I loved the Knights of the Round Table. I don't remember this, but my mother tells me when I was 5 or 6, I made an entire suit of armor out of like construction paper and a little sword. So it was just in there. So when I saw that there was an outlet to really put on armor and fight, I was absolutely entranced. And so I did that for a few years. Going to the Ren fairs and putting on armor and fighting with a group called Knights Association of Arms. And when that group closed down, I was really bummed out. And my friend Randy, who'd gotten me into it, he's like, "Oh, well, there's this other group. It's not quite the same, but at least we'd get to go fight." And so I showed up to the SCA, having won some tournaments in the Ren Fair circuit where everybody had a short two-handed sword, and got absolutely demolished because I had never dealt with shields before. I didn't really know what to do with them. I remember the first time somebody rushed me and wrapped me in the back of the head, I looked at the marshal and asked if I was allowed to throw that person if they got in tight like that again. They're like, "No, that's not allowed here." So I was like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? And so I definitely, I was frustrated, but I was also enthralled because this was this new challenge. And particularly at that time, 20 years ago, the SEAers were the best medieval fighters in the world. You know, HEMA had kind of started, we called it WMA back then. I actually ran a study group with a friend of mine, but that was really in its infancy. And so the level of the really, really good fighters in the SEA was just light years past what I had encountered before. And so I just jumped in, full steam. And I was, of course, told that I would not be successful using a two-handed sword, that I had to use sword and shield, and that I'd never be any good, and I'd never get knighted or win tournaments. And I'm kind of a cranky bastard. So that made me want to do it more, actually. And so that's my primary weapons form. And what I found is that the culture that surrounds the combat is really what got me completely hooked. The idea of using combat, this medieval martial art, to become a better person, which is so ingrained in our chivalric culture, really echoed the Asian martial arts that I'd come to before, where character was so important. And it was something that I had really found was missing in Western boxing and even classical fencing. Those things just weren't really emphasized. And so in a lot of ways, the SEA felt like coming home. And then, of course, just some of the best people I'd ever met were in the SEA. So I went native, I think, pretty quickly.
So did you fall in love with two-sword then while you were doing the Renaissance fighting?
Yes. So the group I started with everybody started with the two-handed sword. And I didn't know it at the time, but the system of fighting we were being taught was called the fives. It's actually a theater style system where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 blocks. And so it was free play, but the teacher at the time was basing his system on a theatrical system from Europe. But everybody was two-handed sword. And then when we got into looking at WMA, which is what it was called at the time, and we were going to the Scala St. George symposiums and stuff like that, we were actually focused on Italian. So we were Fiore guys. And so that was also, the sword in two hands was definitely our focus. Although the nice thing about Fiore is that it's a complete system. So essentially, Fiore is, here's how to wrestle with a stick, here's how to wrestle with a sword, here's how to wrestle with a sword in armor, here's how to wrestle with a poleaxe, and that's kind of how it goes. And so, although I love the two-handed sword, there was this idea that good fighting just is good fighting with whatever you happen to have. The downside for SEA heavy combatants is that because Fiore is so grapple heavy, it's harder to translate those techniques into our combat sport. And the German longsword systems tend to be much more blade attack heavy. They have grappling, but percentage-wise, it's more like 80-20. So I found it much easier to translate the German historical stuff into our modern combat sport. And so that's what shifted my kind of fight book focus from the Italian stuff to the German stuff. But I always wanted to be a two-handed sword guy.
So how did you decide? I assume you squired, yes?
I did, actually, yep.
Who did you squire to?
So I squired to Sir Colin McClear, and it was interesting. So for me, especially when I started, the SEA was just another martial art. So I just went to practice. I wasn't super interested in events. I didn't go to any, and so I went to Ducal Prize, which is a big Western event. It's a KHTI event for Land and Funds, and they had a great weapons list. And I ended up going to semifinals with my little two-handed sword, and nobody had any idea who I was. They're like, who's this 19-year-old kid? And Colin saw me, and he took me. He saw a lot of potential and took me out back and beat the snot out of me. Actually, I was like, "What the hell? I thought I was good at this." And so we started kind of corresponding a little bit because he lived in a different part of the kingdom than I did. And then when I started getting a little bit more serious about being good at SEA combat, I started driving to mission practice, which at the time was, Valhalla. You could have 100-person practice. It was amazing. And so I would go with my little two-handed sword and kind of get beat up a little bit. And Colin was there. And, what Colin says is he'd had other people come to him, say, how do I use this two-handed sword? But for Colin, the difference was he would give me something to work on, and I would actually go work on it and come back and be able to do the thing. And that happened for several months. And then he said, you could be really good at this, and we seem to get along. What do you think about having a relationship? And I was somewhat ignorant really about what it meant. I didn't understand all of the cultural ramifications, but I knew that he was a good teacher, that I knew that I liked him a lot. I knew that he was good at the things that I wanted to be good at. And so we kind of settled on this formal relationship. And his style of fighting, he's a two-handed sword guy, but he fights with a basket hilt on his lead hand, and does a much more of kind of a boxy punch blocking system. And so we fight nothing alike at all, at all, except that we put both hands on the stick. That's about as close as we come. But I think the best thing he did for me was to be a cheerleader and a guide. He didn't try to tell me what to do. He really gave me space to try to find my way and incorporate the things I wanted to do. So we were a really, really good fit. If he had been a more heavy-handed knight, I don't think we would have gotten along very well.
So after you squired, was that when you got more interested in going to events and doing tourneys?
No. So for me, he was just the black belt I studied under. And in fact, he would get, I think, frustrated with me because I wouldn't go to a lot of stuff. And I didn't fight in any tournaments. I wasn't interested. I would show up and fight roses, but I think that was the traditional Asian martial artist in me. For 20 years, I'd essentially had the tournaments are for ego and for showing off and not really the point of the art. And so I just wasn't particularly interested. And then I actually moved up to Ontario very briefly. I chased a girl. And so I ended up in Seattle, and I was going to the Beaverton practice, and I got to meet some of the people there. And then I came back, and actually what happened was I came back and I went to a war and had a great time, and people started noticing me. And Colin, I remember, kind of got frustrated because he felt like I wasn't getting the renown that I deserved. And I felt that frustration in him. And I remember thinking to myself, well, if I'm never going to get knighted, I can win a tournament. I can have some control over that, right? I can just train really hard. So I decided to fight in tournaments. And so I entered my first coronet, went to finals, lost to Dragal, who's an amazing fighter. And then I entered my second coronet, and I was out in 4. I ran into Duke Alden, and we had one of the best fights I've ever had. I was telling you about it off screen, and it was amazing, but I didn't win. And so I won my third coronet, and I just did 1, 2, 3. So I was from the time I decided I was really serious about being part of the culture, bought a membership, started entering tournaments. I was offered knighthood within 18 months of that. I think my prowess was pretty good. And I think when people saw that I actually was interested in being a citizen of the SEA and wasn't just dabbling or, having my fun and not contributing, I think that made a big difference.
So what made your mind shift to wanting to be a citizen of the SEA and sort of indoctrinate yourself? Was it that your knight was frustrated?
No, it was really, actually I can tell you there was a moment. So I was so impressed by the knights that I saw. Sir Colin was my knight. I got to meet Duke Fabian. I got to meet Duke Uther, who was one of the scariest humans I'd ever met. And I got to see the knights, how they comported themselves. And so I was starstruck pretty early. And so that was a big thing, the chivalric culture. But there was actually a moment, I was fighting at a coronet on the pickup field. And I told another, oh, you did a really good job today. And he was another unbelt. And he said, wow, that means a lot coming from you. And it just struck me that whether I was really intending to do so or not, I had an impact on the people there. Like they had decided that I was theirs. And so I think it was just that moment where these other people care about me and my place here. And so I felt that sense of ownership with the community. And so like, I think all those little pieces, seeing the night, seeing the fighting, my night, meeting some of my heroes, and it all just kind of congealed in that moment. I was like, oh, this is my thing. This is what I do. These are my people. So it all kind of clicked that way, I think.
Did you continue to do your other martial arts at the same time?
For a long time. Yes, I did. I would say that up until I moved to Seattle, I was still boxing a little bit in Seattle, kind of casually. And then when I moved back to the West Kingdom, I was only in Antioch about a year, but when I came back to the West Kingdom, I decided that if I wanted to be a good SCA fighter, I should probably fully commit. And so that's when I went from the one practice a week and doing other things to hitting 3 and 4 practices a week. And even at, 28, that was kind of tough on the body. So I had to really decide where my priorities were. And I love swords. And really the thing is I want to be a Jedi. That's really the thing. And being
so
a
it's
knight,
like a lightsaber.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so being a knight in the SCA is probably as close to being a Jedi as I'm going to come. And so it just consumed my life. The sword martial arts really did. And so I think that's about the time that I stopped trying to do other things for a long time.
So maybe you'll think this is blasphemy, and this is totally an aside, but I've always wanted to do sort of like a Twilight tourney where we've taken like glow-in-the-dark tape or paint and we put them on our bastard swords.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that would be fun.
I think if you're having a specialty event, that's cool. Our medieval forebears did all kinds of weird pageant events. So
anyway, back to you. So you sort of already sort of touched on it, that when you decided to get serious, you shifted from 1 practice a week to like 3 or 4 or 5. Yep. What else did you shift?
I mean, I would say that was really the big thing. It was just, you only have so much time in a day and so many physical resources. You have to put those cards where they're most important. So I grew up short and fat, and I come from a family of a lot of obesity, a lot of health issues, diabetes, high blood pressure. And so even with all the training as a kid, I was chunky. And so in high school, I decided, well, I don't like that. I'm going to, work out really hard. And at first I did it kind of badly. So I got too skinny. I wasn't eating enough. But I made physical fitness a priority fairly early on. And so even going to 3 or 4 SCA practices a week, I was still finding ways to run and do resistance training because I knew that I needed to do everything I could to be healthy and be good. And because I'm not genetically gifted, I had to maximize what I did have. So really it was just, basically for me it was, am I going to live twice a week and do 3 martial arts every day, or am I going to live twice a week and do 1 martial art every day? And that was really the big shift.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know that about you, because you're that whole your body is a temple thing. People think that you're just physically gifted, and so I think that's interesting, because I think your mind shift in high school or whatever, and your martial arts background has given you sort of this discipline in your life, and you can tell me I'm wrong, that bleeds into almost everything you do. Yes?
Yeah. So one of the things, I don't get into it a bunch, but it is really important. My family upbringing was pretty rough. Both of my parents were abusive. Both of them were addicts. So there were a lot of, and unfortunately, so was my stepfather. So there was a lot of bad, and there was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of instability in my life. And so the part of why I was so captivated by the martial artists, Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san, is because there's a dignity and a consistency to a disciplined lifestyle that to a scared 7-year-old kid was irresistible. I wanted to be, that calm, that stable, that disciplined. And so that absolutely bleeds into everything that I do. And now, because I have been studying Zen Buddhism, and discipline is a big part of that, there really, for me, is no difference between meditating every morning or going to practice or dealing with my students at school or holding a meeting. Like everything I do, I want to be as present and as good as I can. Even meetings, I want to hold a better meeting today than I held last week. And that just kind of is my mindset. And I like that because it is so different from the fear and the instability that I dealt with as a little kid.
That's I want to say cool, but that doesn't really cover it, but super fascinating that you've been able to structure your life that way based on what you didn't want, what you did want. Because you really, I mean, you are one of the most disciplined people I think I've ever met. I loved what you said in your mental thing about how working out is like brushing your teeth, like it's not an option. You just have to do it. And is that sort of how you structure your training? Is that these are the things that have to get done today and there's just there's no wiggle room?
Pretty much. I'm not psychotic about it. If I broke my arm, I would, take a break from some things. But the other thing is I've been doing it for so long that I feel bad when I don't do them. It's kind of like eating, I can't eat a big cheeseburger and fries and a milkshake. I would feel very sick. Not that I don't eat junk food. Like I love a good Taco Bell burrito and some chocolate, but most of the time I legitimately crave like salad with meat on it and vegetables and things like that because I've been doing it for so long. And with working out and with training, it's the same way. I'm having a terrible time sleeping without practice because my body's just not getting the input that it's used to for so long. And even though I'm working out more to try to make up the difference, it's not the same kind of happy endorphins. So now, that kind of training and that kind of routine is my normal. It's not something I have to make myself do. So I just legitimately feel bad when I don't. Like physically, I don't feel right.
Cool. So let's go back to your training for coronets. Because also on your mental thing, because, I watched that twice. You had talked about how you were sort of an anxious tourney fighter. While you were training to win a coronet, did you fight in other tourneys to sort of train yourself to get out of that anxious mindset?
No, I've actually, I haven't fought in very many tournaments. I fought in the Golden Rivers Championship because in Sinagua at the time, that was kind of the second most prestigious tournament. You actually got to wear a circlet and put a circlet on your lady. And it's in a lot of ways considered, if you're winning Golden Rivers, you're probably going to win a coronet soon. It's one of those. So I only fought in that. And that was really about it. I think I have been lucky. I was lucky because I had competed in fencing and boxing and martial arts before. With a few rare exceptions, I didn't kind of mind blow myself, right? I didn't mess it up too bad. And so I knew pretty early on that if I had trained, if I had done all the things that I could do, if I went to every practice, if I hit the pail every day, made sure my armor was good, if I did those things, then what else could I do? But if I didn't do those things, then I would have that thought in the back of my head, well, I could have done more. So what if I don't perform today? I could have done more. So what if I can't do everything I should be able to do? And like I was saying in the video, I don't ever worry about beating any particular people, but I definitely worry about performing well. I want to feel like I'm fighting well. And when I don't, I'm pretty bummed out. So. Okay.
So you reigned as Prince of the Mists?
I've reigned in Sinagua and the Mists.
Sinagua. Oh, you both. Okay.
Yes.
How was your first reign? Like, what did you expect, and how was it different than what you expected?
I wasn't sure what I expected. But I will tell you that I think Prince of Sinagua is possibly the best job in the SCA, because Sinagua is somewhat remote. You know, just it's spread out. It's the Central Valley, so it's a more farming area, and so they're more spread out. And like 5 out of every 6 kings in the West tend to come from the Mists, because the Mist is more densely populated. Sinaguans love their royalty. They are excited. They are take care of them. You are a rock star when you are the Prince of Sinagua. And so I was really, really lucky that my consort and I were both well thought of. The people were excited to see us win. The people came together to support us. It was absolutely amazing. And when you're Prince, if there's ever a really big problem, you still get to kick it up to mom and dad. And so I had a couple small things, but anything that was, you know, kind of kingdom level drama, I just had to let the king and queen know. So I thought it was a very, very positive experience.
Were both of your principality reigns before you won crown?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I won Sinagan Coronet, and then my lady at the time and I broke up, and I moved to Santa Cruz and was sleeping on my knight's couch, actually. And I met my wife, my now wife. And so I wanted to, she had heard of the SEA and she'd come to some practices, but she'd never been to an event. And so I wanted to fight for her because I 100% am totally invested in the Victorian ideal chivalry, romantic, you know, your consort, you know, inspires you to greater feats. And so I wanted to fight for her. It was the most romantic thing I had to do. And I said, well, I'll fight with a boar spear and a sword. I don't know how to do that. So I'll fight really hard and I'll lose. But it'll be a good story. And so I took her to her first event, and we ended up winning Miss Coronet. And so she did an amazing job, but she went from 0 to princess pretty quick.
Well, that's a good test of the relationship too.
Yeah.
It's wow. So how is reigning in the Mists different than Sinagua?
It was, in some ways, it was more formal. You know, I was lucky because I had always traveled, because I always wanted to go fight the best fighter. So I was not unknown in the Mists, and people were incredibly welcoming of my lady because they knew that she was new. She was very invested in doing a good job, so I think the reign went really well. Some things were different. In Sinagua, the peers do not swear fealty to the coronet. In the Mists, they do. And I struggled with that a little bit. Coming from Sinagua, you know, my fealty is reserved for the crown, and that's it. And so that was a little bit of a different change. And then we had to fight against Sinagua at the next Principality War, and that was odd. Sir Fergus McCart threatened to smash me really good, but I managed to not let that happen. But I felt very, very fortunate that both of my Principality reigns, the populace was amazing and supportive, and they went quite well. Generally, the Mists tend to be a little more formal, and they tend to be a little bit more focused on kingdom level activities. So the joke is, if we travel, Sinaguans will say, I'm from Sinagua, that's in the West. And then Misties will say, I'm from the West, I live in the Mists. And that kind of gives you an insight into kind of the different focus, but they were both really positive.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about when you got knighted. Did you take a vigil?
Yes. So I was, my vigil was amazing. You know how you build up ideas in your head and then they're never as good as you think they're going to be? This was not that. This was better. So I stayed up all night. I fasted from sundown to sun up. I stayed up all night, and I had visitors coming until dawn. I was very fortunate that people wanted to come and talk to me. And then I had a sunrise passage of arms. So I put on my armor with no sleep and no food, and fought the people that would come out and fight with me. And that was great. And then I had the ritual bath, and I went in with just the white linen shirt, and it was everything I could have ever dreamed in a vigil and knighting, and more. It was amazing.
How has your view changed of knighthood from when you were knighted to now, if at all?
Oh, it definitely has. I have a more nuanced view of knighthood. I think when I was knighted, I saw some of my heroes, you know, just they were acquaintances, they were friendly acquaintances, but I saw just the public side of them, and I had read books, and so I had a very idealized, this is the one way knighthood is. And then as I got to know the knights, and I got to spend time being a knight, I got to see that there were different kinds of knights. There are different flavors of knights, and that's not only okay but necessary, because everybody is polishes that different facet of chivalry. And reigning made a big difference after my first reign, and I got to see the really from a different point of view the service that knights bring, and how different strengths and weaknesses comport with each other. I think I developed a much more nuanced view of knighthood.
So what is your favorite piece of regalia from getting knighted?
So I didn't have a foster knight, but if I did, it would be Sir Zaid in Sinagua, because Colin lived in the Mist and I lived in Sinagua, and so we got to see each other a few times a year. We talked on the phone, and he was a great distance knight, but he was still a distance knight. And Sir Zaid, he was kind of the local guy that was holding household practices and household art nights, and so I was over at his house a couple nights a week, and he really went out of his way to take care of me, and he would let me get in the car, and we would carpool to practices, and we would have long talks about chivalry. And he's an amazing knight. And so when I was offered knighthood, he had just gotten into forging. He had gotten a home forge, and so when I was at my vigil, he presented me with this chain right here, this twisted steel chain that he had made in his forge. It was one of the first things he made, and it was I was quite blown away. And so it really it still means a lot to me. It's one of the few pieces of regalia that I have not passed on in the decade I've been a knight, and this will be a toughie if it ever goes. That'll be rough.
I can relate to that. So what was the one piece of vigil advice that stuck with you?
Can I give you two?
Yes.
Yeah. So the one of the things was Duke Uther, who I really didn't know. We had thought we were friendly, but I didn't know him particularly well. He came to the vigil, and he said, nobody owns chivalry. Chivalry is not yours. We are all the keepers of chivalry, and we are in this lineage going through all of our ancestors in the SCA back to the Marshal and Saladin and all those things. And when you die and you go to heaven, you're going to have to face those knights, and they're going to ask you, how did chivalry fare on your watch? And what do you want to tell them? And so the idea that I don't get to own chivalry, I just get to be a caretaker of it for a while, and I have a responsibility to try to pass it on in as good shape or better, that really stuck with me. I still get chills thinking about it in the vigil. And that was very, very powerful for me, and probably started the change to a more nuanced and a less self-centered view of chivalry, I think. So that was really important. The other piece is a little funnier. Duke Thorfinn came to my vigil, and Thorfinn is amazing, hilarious, and he's also a great warfighter. And I had won Sinagan Coronet right after I'd been offered knighthood, so I was on vigil and I was the heir at the time. And so Thorfinn came in, and he was kind of giving me dual advice. But Thorfinn looked at me and goes, Mark, you're pretty good on the tournament field. You're a good fighter, and you do okay on the war field. You're fine, but war is when you give back to your kingdom. Tournament's about you, but war is about your kingdom. It's when you serve. So you should step it up on the war field. And I had never thought about it that way before, that war was the play. It wasn't about me. It was me giving back to the kingdom. And so from that point until now, whenever I take the war field, my war strategy is what would make Thorfinn proud of me. And that's what I do. And so I would say I got a lot of really, really good advice, but those are two stories that I tell a lot.
Yeah, I'd never thought of war that way either. That makes a lot more sense to me, because I'm not a war fighter, but I'm gonna have to consider that. That's interesting. When did you decide that you wanted to win crown?
I never decided that.
Okay.
So I had no intention of entering crown. I wasn't. First, I didn't think I was good enough to win, so I wasn't particularly worried about it. But knighthood was the thing that drew me. I wanted to be a servant of the crown. That was my pie in the sky. That was my dream. Was knighthood. And then shortly after I was knighted, in fact, Patsy and I stepped down from Miss Coronet. We went to one event, and then the West has open crowns, and Duke Conrad and Duke Sean of Artemisia were entering. And my friend Sigifrith, who's a knight, said, Mark, you need to defend the Western Crown. You're a knight. You have a responsibility to enter. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. So I entered Crown. It was the first Crown I'd ever entered, and we ended up winning Crown in the pouring rain with my two-handed sword. And I cried like a baby because I tend to try to fight from a very no-mind place. And so I entered Crown not thinking about being king, thinking about being a good knight. That was really my thought process. And then we ended up winning, and I think especially because I had never really considered it, and I really had been just kind of focusing on the fights during the day, it all crashed in on me at once. And there's pictures of me kneeling in the rain with my face in my hands because the enormity of what has just happened with my wife. It was, I actually remember driving to Coronation. We were driving to Beltane, and we're driving the car, and I looked at my wife, at Patsy, I was like, we won Crown. She's like, yes, we did. But I couldn't believe it. It was so outside of my mental construct of myself in the SCA that, yeah. Now the second one, I did want to win. So maybe it's accurate to say the second one. And because I felt like my wife being a countess, it felt unfinished. That was really the thing. I was happy being a count. I was like, I won a crown. That's amazing. I could die happy in terms of the SCA, but my wife being a countess felt unfinished. And so I decided to enter that. And we ended up being victorious in that one. And then the third crown we fought in, I actually fought sword and buckler because I had started getting some pressure because I had never lost a crown, and I didn't like that very much. People were like, oh, you've won every crown you've ever entered, and people made a thing of it, and I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy the pressure. And so the idea was I would fight sword and buckler and fight real hard, but probably I'm not going to win crown with the sword and buckler. And it didn't really help. I actually remember when I got to sight with my little sword and buckler, I still had to, oh, it's your day. I'm like, have you seen who's in the list? Thorfinn's in the list, Fabian's in the list, Pliska's in the list. All those gods and killers are in the list, and I have a 12-inch pie plate. The day went our way, and that was something. But I would say the only crown I entered that I had I would like to win this one was this one.
So, I mean, winning crown with a buckler in the West is an amazing feat. Amazing. Who were you in finals with in
Duke
that
Fabian.
one?
Duke Fabian.
Wow. Cool.
Scared the shit out of me. There was actually a point in finals before they called Leon, and he was pacing, getting revved up, and I looked at my buckler and I thought, who thought this was a good idea? So I had to really dig deep and fight very, very carefully, because when you're fighting Fabian or any fighter of that caliber, a mistake is the end of your day.
What role does Patsy play for you on tourney day?
There is no tournament fighting without Patsy. That does not exist. We are 100% a team. So she is supportive as I go to multiple practices a week, and I'm in the gym, and I'm tired and sore, and then she makes sure that if I'm getting anxious, she cracks jokes and smiles with me, and we support each other. And then when we go to the field, I salute the crown, I salute the opponent. When I salute Patsy, we make eye contact, and I take a big deep breath, and I hold it for a slow count of 10 while I'm maintaining eye contact, and I let the excess energy ground out from my feet. But she is with me on the field. There's no sense of I am out there. It is for me, tournament fighting is a team sport, and that team is me and Patsy. So I cannot conceive of tournament fighting that does not include her. So
what's your tournament day ritual or method to keep your head where you want it?
So I like to have everything packed the night before. I don't want to have to worry about packing anything that morning. if we're driving a site, because I don't want to just have the stress of, do I have everything? Am I going to lose everything? So I try to streamline my process. So I have it packed. I have my Rockstar energy drink, and I have my power bars. I try to have a meal that has a good mix of protein, carbohydrates, and some fat, so it kind of sticks to me a little bit, because I don't want to have the like blood sugar spike that goes up and down, and then I feel all woozy. And then we go to site, and I try really hard to pretend that there's no tournament. I go see my friends. I make sure that I've signed into the list table when it opens, because I don't want to have to worry about that. And then I'll help people put up pavilions if that's what they want to do. I'll chat with people I don't get to see for a long time. But I try really hard to just not worry about the fact that there's a tournament that day. And then I'll go warm up. I'll do a bunch of slow work. And then I will fight until I get that first sense of burn in my muscles, because I want to get everything warmed up. And then I go chill out, because I don't want to get fatigued. I just want to get that first kind of burn, that first shortness of breath, kind of blow everything out, get it ready, and I'll go and sit down. So I might fight the first melee if I haven't gotten a chance to get to that point, because at least in the West, we generally do a grand melee before and sometimes in between rounds. And then that's it. I don't fight in the other melees. I don't really watch the tournament. I just want to be kind of physically and mentally relaxed, and then, turn on really intensely for the 30 seconds or 2 minutes, however long that fight is, and then go back and sit down. So it's definitely little short sprints for me.
What was your favorite part of being king?
There are a lot of good parts. Recognizing people is definitely the best. Getting to give awards, because you're not really the reason, but when you get to be the figurehead that bestows that peerage, or gets to give that AOA, you get to create this moment where this member of your populace, gets to have this joy, and there's nothing else like it. You get to live that joy with that person, and it's such a privilege to be part of someone's peerage or any award, or just bringing them up and recognizing them. So I love that. I absolutely love that. The first time I got to lead the Western Army in war was at West Ontier, actually, the very first time. And I was so proud of the Western people that I was teary most of the day. I was so proud. And that's the thing is my knight, drilled into me really early on. Is just one of the first things he said, is that the crown is the first servant of the populace, and whatever else I have done or the ways my views on knighthood and things have changed. I believe that you are the first servant of the populace. Your job is to try to embody the ideals for the people, and anytime you get to touch that a little bit, that's the best part.
So do you think you'll fight in another crown? I mean, you sort of talked about how you think part of it is sort of a duty as a knight to contest the list. Do you think you'll do it again, or?
I don't know. I go back and forth. Reigning can be very emotionally tough, and some of the things we've had to deal with in our reigns have been. I would do it the same way again. When you say you're going to be a shield to your populace, you have to mean it and you have to do it. But it was rough. And I also, because I'm a bit of an introvert, even as much as I love it, that is a large amount of emotional outlay, and I'm not capable of half-assing it. I just, even if I've thought, I'll take it easier this time around, I don't have that in me. So I get little stirrings now and then, but I don't know. I have no plans in this moment of doing it. It's not something that drives me. I want to get better, but like I've said in other places, the skill is the most important thing to me, not necessarily a tournament win. So I don't know.
So how do you test your skill and keep yourself motivated if you're not tourney focused?
Well, the thing you have to understand is the reality that I suck. This is very important. I suck. I go to practice and I come home, I'm like, I suck. There's so much, I can see farther down the road, always. So it wouldn't matter if I could guarantee that I won every tournament for the rest of my career ever. What I'm interested in is how do I get a little further down the road? And I know that there's a limited window. You know, I'm 42, and even if my knowledge increases at some point, no matter how healthy I eat and how much I train, my body won't be able to do the things my mind asks of it. And so I want to make sure that I use all my time as effectively as I can. So it's I have to be careful because there can almost be a franticness to it. Like, oh, I'm going to run out of time. I got to do this. I'm going to run out of time. You know, if I get injured, it can be really hard for me to take the break because I'm wasting time. I'm going to run out of time. I need to maximize what I've got. So I'm pretty internally focused. I haven't generally needed external motivators very often to do things. And so that's the thing is, and like I was talking about in the mind video, the experience of having those flow state moments where everything falls away and the fight just happens and it is easy and spacious and beautiful, those don't happen really often. And so that is kind of a goal. The more I train, the more I go and fight really, really tough people, the more likely I am to get pushed to those states. And for me, that is the experience that I'm chasing when I'm fighting, is those transcendent moments, which doesn't always happen in a tournament. You know, I can't, I've had some, but I've won royal lists where that did not happen. So that's no guarantee.
How do you balance your training and your focus with training your students?
We play a bunch of games. So there are some trainings that are just for my students. I'm essentially teaching a class. And so that makes it really easy. And then in other practices, I cut out chunks of time. So I will say, for this, I'm going to fight you in this way. And then I'm going to go do something else. And so I can play a lot of games. What ends up happening when I'm fighting, my students are just other fighters that maybe aren't quite as advanced. They are sparring and I am drilling. So I might say that I will only, land this combination, offside block to body kind of thing. And they'll be free fighting, but I'm just trying to make this particular technique happen. And so, or I'll take things away. Well, I've hit this person with this 3 times, so that is no longer my repertoire for the set. And so I just try to balance what I do so that I'm still getting a chance to improve in some facet. Usually I have to choose smaller goals and they get to improve at whatever level they're at. And even when I fight, other knights, sometimes I'll say, well, what are you working on? And they'll tell me, I'm like, is there a fight I could bring to you that would be helpful for that? Because the way I fight is not necessarily going to be helpful for somebody that's working in inside game, for example. So I might force myself to be a more kind of forward aggressive fighter in that set, which will force me to be better because it's not a natural thing that I do. And it gives that other fighter a chance to work on the thing that they're working on. So it's a good system because it pushes me out of my comfort zone and they get something out of it too. Because sometimes it has been said that fighting me, I just take people's tools away and then they don't get to do anything because I like to be an outside fighter and control the tempo of the fight so much. So I can try to force myself not to do that, and that works out.
I remember, I think the first time I fought you was at an Ontario West War, and we were doing some passes, and I think I stopped and said, what can I do to make this more challenging? But you were very gracious and told me that it was challenging, and I'm not sure I believed you, but that's okay. Anyway, so you have written a couple of treatises, right, on sort of historical sword work?
Yes.
What drives you to do that? And do you incorporate that into your fight?
Yes. So because I started in HEMA, which at the time was WMA, I came into the SEA with the idea of sword fighting. It's very important to me that I'm trying very hard to sword fight. The rattan batons are sword simulators for me. They're not sticks. They're not anything else. And so, especially because there are not very many accomplished two-handed sword fighters in the SCA when I wanted to look for inspiration and new tech ideas. Often I would turn back to the historical manuals. And as my fighting skill has improved and my understanding of fighting has improved, generally what I found is that I have not invented shit. It's all in there. And just understanding how the dynamics of our particular combat sport works allows me to bring in a lot more of the period sword techniques, which are not profoundly different. There are some weird kind of gimmicky things, but for the most part, good fighting is good fighting. And so, I think, so there are some things that I won't do. So I will not block with my gauntlets on purpose. Many fighters will, polearm and two-handed sword fighters. It is legal-ish, because technically if your hand is on the weapon, then it's part of the weapon. I definitely will not do that. If I get hit in the hand, I feel like an idiot. I sometimes have a butt spike or a spike on the pommel of my sword, but I only throw it at the face because I think of it as a smashing pommel. And if I hit somebody in the face with an open face helmet with a half-pound ball of steel, that probably would be a fight ender. But if I hit somebody in the chest with a pommel, they would laugh at me and cave my head in. So I don't do those techniques. When I'm fighting with the buckler, I don't throw wraps because those are not generally found in the period treatises. So I just try to do the things with the rattan baton that I do with the steel sword anyway. And I read the treatises both because I want to understand how they did it and because those open up new avenues in my mind to explore as I'm trying to improve my own fighting.
And do you find it difficult at all to sort of adapt some of what they're teaching in the treatises to the way we fight, since we don't grapple and we don't really target hands or stuff like that?
So that's part of why I switched to the German focus on the whole. But even the Fiore, he has about 12 or 13 wide distance plays, everything else is grappling. And the answer is no, not really. You have to have good command of range and angles and timing. And when you have those things, the period techniques they're not all weirdly intricate and complicated. There are some of those, but the first and the classical two-handed sword plays, when they cut at you, you countercut and stab them in the face. That's period sword fighting. The differences are that, so we don't target hands, and it's not even that we don't target hands, because in the period treatises, they don't talk about targeting the hands a lot, but because we don't target hands, we tend to have a closer fighting range. Right? If your hand is invulnerable, you can creep in a little closer. Because we hit with a hard percussive impact, SCAers tend to be what we call hard in the bind, right? Not very often do you just cross swords in the middle and kind of from there. Generally, you're hitting through. So as long as you understand that you have to adapt to the range and the flow of the fight, and that SCA heavy fighters tend to be hard in the bind, and that rattan bounces rather than glides in the same way that steel swords do, I can do pretty close to anything with the rattan sword that I can do with the steel sword.
Okay, so you have a question, and this might be a joke because there's a little laughing emoji, but it says, how does he come up with wonderful names for his techniques like the Ghost's Bind?
Is that David?
Yeah, it's Felix.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I think it comes back to wanting to be a Jedi. So I'm just a giant dork. So the Ghost Bind idea is because SCAers are hard in the bind all the time. If you want to do some of the techniques, what I do is I post my sword out until they're about to make contact like we would bind, and then I flow around without allowing the contact to happen. And because I have a drill that's called the Ghost Drill, where you avoid sword swings rather than block them, and you and I have done that together, actually. Yes. I think I was just, it's like the Ghost Drill, but with swords, so it's the Ghost Bind. It was flippant, and then it stuck, and Felix likes to give me a hard time about it.
Okay. So when I looked at the order of precedence, you have a couple of awards, the Western Hero and the Defender of the West. What are those, and how are they different? Okay,
so the Defender of the West is for people that have helped the kingdom in war. So the nice thing about Defenders of the West is that if you drove, or you're part of the encampment, or you were a water bearer, or you gleaned arrows, if you have done anything to help the kingdom, you can be a Defender of the West. So that is not necessarily a fighting award. It often is, but often it's given to people that are in support roles, which is really, really cool. The hero of the West is as close to getting knighted again as I will ever get. So Duke Alden actually started that award, and he created it with Sir Brand in mind, who is if not the greatest warfighter in the history of the SCA, he's in the running. And the hero of the West, the litany are things like, they transcend the bonds of the flesh. It's essentially for people who have had those mind-bogglingly heroic and epic moments or careers that just go beyond what should be physically possible. You literally are a freaking superhero on the warfield. It is not something, it's definitely something I aspire to, especially after Thorfinn's, do better in war speech, but it's not anything that I ever thought I would be worthy of. And one of our crowns thought that I had performed in a way that I was, and I'm getting a little choked up even talking about it, because it is the most powerful litany I've ever heard in any kingdom anywhere. And it was one of those hero things that I never thought that I would be worthy of. And I feel pretty lucky every day that somebody thought that I was.
So given the nature of your personality, how much pressure do you put on yourself to feel worthy of these things that you don't feel worthy of?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, like you talked about earlier how you're always striving to be better, everything, like every day better, and everything you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how much pressure do you put on yourself from something like the hero of the West to live up to it, I guess?
Oh, quite a bit. That can be the downside of the type of driven that I am. One of the problems that I face is that whatever I achieve becomes the new normal. And so anything short of that is just failure. So the pressure of that is that if I go to the war field and I'm not epically badass, well, then I have not achieved the new baseline and I have failed my kingdom. If I go into a set of fights and I'm having a bad day, I have not achieved the baseline of what the West Kingdom would hope from me, so I have failed. It can be a little hard to take enjoyment in some of those things because the pressure to live up to the new normal can be very high. So that's a problem. It kind of becomes like a zero-sum game. There's the status quo or failure, and there is no success because
I asked because I'm obviously not as disciplined as you, but I have sort of that same problem where I can't ever enjoy any success I have because I'm always measuring on what I think I should be doing, and it's never enough, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you find the balance of driving yourself with your personality, but also acknowledging that you've been successful?
So interestingly enough, the answer is humility. Humility is not like the bowing and the scraping and the I'm not worthy and nothing is good. That's false humility. Humility is understanding that you exist in a context. For me to say I'm a little flippant and energized, but for me to say I'm not a good fighter would be dishonest, right? I fight well. I've achieved some good things. So to say that I'm not a good fighter, that would be dishonest. That's not humility. That's if anything, hubris, right? Because I'm like, so I try to look at the context, the people around me, and so I can take pride in the things that I've accomplished, and I definitely am proud of the skill that I have achieved so far, because it is a high level, right? When I look at the world around me, and humility lets me know that I can also grow. So I think there was actually a time, I remember, this was a good story. I was really frustrated at a practice. There had been a couple of people that I felt like were not taking shots, and they were running in, getting hit, trying to land something. And I remember being very, very frustrated and taking it very personally. And I was kind of sitting there, I was like, why are these people doing this stupid shit to me? Why can't, and I was talking to them, and I realized, like, they don't know that is not a good idea. They don't have the awareness yet to understand that the things that they're doing are going to get them hit, and that they're making poor choices. I thought they were making a choice. They were just acting out of a lack of understanding and awareness. But because, like I was saying, the new normal, my level of understanding is normal, well, everybody should know that. And so that was a failure of my humility to understand the context I was operating in. Not to say that I'm, the best ever, but if I'm working with somebody that is not as experienced as me, and I assume that they're going to understand things in the same way that I do, that's kind of dumb. And that's not being humble, like, I'm no better. That's not understanding the context you're operating in. So I think trying to be mindful of everybody, and it's not just me, seems to help. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess, you don't self-deprecate. Like you have the understanding that you are a phenomenal, I'm going to call it bastard sword, you call it two-handed sword fighter. But you are always pushing yourself because you can be better. Mm-hmm. And they aren't mutually exclusive. Like, because we've talked before about how, you can be like dominant at practice and still go home and be like, I sucked tonight. Right. Yeah. So I just wondered how you balance that in your brain. Cause you're dominating, but you still think you're sucking. And it's just, I don't know.
Well, it's the, Dukovic likes to say, everybody has their own level of suck. Right. And that's related to the reality that you're not really competing against anybody else. Just because I happen to hit somebody a bunch of times, if I'm not performing to the level that I'm striving for, well, then it's still a bit of a failure, because I'm not competing with that person. I'm not interested in beating that individual. I'm interested in working on my fighting. So and that has gotten me into trouble at times. Like, I've actually hurt people's feelings because I've gone to a practice or a tournament and been like, I suck today. And people have been like, well, you hit me and I didn't touch you, so you're kind of an arrogant shit. I'm like, well, right. No, that's not.
Or it's like, how bad do you think I suck?
Exactly. And I've had to explain that I'm certainly not judging that person against any particular standard of mine, but I'm not judging myself against their standard either. I'm competing against myself. But those conversations where I unintentionally hurt people's feelings were good reminders, both to watch my mouth, but also to watch that internal dialogue, because I can be maybe a little too harsh sometimes, and it's good to get those reminders.
And the cool thing about your personality is you're not comparing yourself. Like, you're just measuring yourself against you. Mm-hmm. And I guess other people need to understand that too. Otherwise it's just like, how bad does he think I suck? Anyway, do you think there's differences in responsibilities in your role as a knight as compared to a duke? Like, is there a next level?
I think so. I think, and I think it's probably different, across cultures. The West Kingdom is definitely a kingdom of the crown, right? The crown's word is law. I know there are other kingdoms that function a little differently. They might call themselves kingdoms of the book. Where they have star councils and things like that. But in the West, the crown's word is law. And so as a knight, my job is to serve the crown. And certainly I will offer counsel if they ask for it, or sometimes if they don't. But I think a royal peer, you have more responsibility to counsel your crown, right? So because that's what we have done those reigns, we've had those experiences, and it's definitely our job to have the crowns back, for sure. But I think as a royal peer, it's also your job to have a quiet word with your crown if you feel like they might be going in a direction that could be bad for the kingdom. And I think that's a little different than the responsibilities of knights. So I do see them as a little different.
what do you you've acted as the Knights counselor a couple times for some guards, and I remember I think maybe it was Count or Duchess Dagmar pointed me in the direction, and you did this like thing on Facebook where you gave like lessons, or and then you guys would contemplate and you would talk about it. Are you sort of, do you study chivalry and the chivalric virtues, and is that like something that you geek on?
Yes. So I'm a big fan of Lola Charnay, and I read, some of the other things. And I will admit very candidly that my take on the chivalric virtues is informed both by Tolkien in my early days and then my Buddhist practice. It affects everything. So like when I talk about humility being an awareness of the context that you're operating on, that comes as much from Buddhism as it does from anything else. But I definitely study those. I pass those out. I'm out of hard copies, but I used to give out Anvil of Virtue from Servetus all the time. I think that's one of the best modern texts ever written on it, particularly for an SCA audience. And so when I was Knight Counselor, I felt like my job was to try to embody them as much as any one person is, and then try to teach them from a historical context and from a kingdom how we operate context, and point them in the direction of other people that I thought embodied those virtues particularly well.
So what do you think collectively as an order, the Order of Chivalry could do better?
That is a tough question.
You can pass.
I think, well, no, it's something I think about quite a bit, because I feel like there is a disconnect that is worth talking about. When I was coming up, I wanted to be a knight so bad. I saw those knights and they were my heroes, and so many of them still are. I don't want to talk in the past tense, but I wanted to be a knight. I wanted to be part of that group. I wanted to be seen as worthy as what knights represented in literature and in history and what I saw in SCA. And I do feel like that is less of a thing with unbelts now. I sometimes get the sense that they don't understand why they should want to be a knight or how to be a knight. And so I think we need to do better just having conversations where people can hear them, because I think generations are different. So, even in training, when I started, I got beat black and blue. Just, I would go to practice and I would go home with 20 bruises all over myself. And if I said no to a shot, I got hit harder. And I sometimes find that does not work for fighters coming up now. If somebody gets, smashed too bad at practice, they're like, those people are jerks and this sucks and I'm done. And if somebody is not taking a shot and you hit them harder, that person's a jerk and this sucks and I'm done. It's not the same kind of, and I'm not trying to turn this into like the kids driven. What I'm saying is the way people relate to that path is different now, because I'm 40 something and they're 20 something, and generations always kind of have that difference. And so we need to figure out what, without compromising the ideals of chivalry, that's very important, but we have to find out what works for the youngins, that makes them want to walk the path and then actually progress along the path. And I think some of it is just having conversations where unbelts and non-fighters can hear them, because I sometimes hear comments about the chivalry as a group and have no idea how people came to that conclusion, because it's never been my experience, but they're getting those ideas somehow. So it's worth talking about. And it's different because as an order, I don't know that we've used social media particularly well. But again, the kids, that's a big part of their SCA experience. And so if we don't acknowledge that in some way, it's probably going to be detrimental.
Yeah. And that's a sort of a fine line too, because, you're only responsible for yourself. Mm-hmm. And, how we talked about, there's all different kinds of knights. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you want to project a certain level or a bar, mm-hmm. or the why, right? The why you want to be a knight that is cohesive. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of an interesting dilemma, I think. Maybe those acts the night things that the guy out in your kingdom is doing, maybe that will address some of that. And the youngins will ask the
I hope
questions,
so. Yeah.
or we'll, whatever.
Mm.
So interesting. You do have a question though, and then did you bring your killing tool? I don't know if I reminded you.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch. So
Okay.
yeah.
So the question is, what do you consider your greatest challenge when serving as crown, and how did you overcome or manage it?
Ooh. Well, so I'll give you kind of a more philosophical answer than a more concrete answer. We have had in our reigns times where we have had to banish a member or members of the populace for reasons we thought were legitimate, and even had to kick it up to the board of directors, and they made further decisions. And because the bylaws are written so that we cannot publicly comment on those things at Crown, and that is designed to protect the privacy of the person, that was really, really tough, because a lot of people without all or even any information made a lot of wild suppositions and assumed motivations of either us as Crown or even the other person that were not accurate. And you take a bit of a beating, and that's really hard when you feel like it is unjust because you are not allowed to share your side of the story. I'm a fairly confrontational person. Not that I like confrontation, but if there's a problem, I want at it head on, and I want to have that uncomfortable conversation. And being in a place where I was not allowed to do that, when people felt like I might have done wrong by the kingdom, was very painful. So that was the hardest for me, for sure. So the more philosophical piece is you can't be everywhere. So there are people, no matter how hard you try, to go unrecognized, that deserve it, because you just can't get to every event and every shire and every barony. And you can't live up to what everybody's idea of a king is, which is actually one of the reasons I like that we have the turnover. I will never be the party king. That's just not who I am. So if someone, if their idea of the SCA is that the SCA is a big party and the king should be the host of the party, I'm gonna let that person down. Luckily, the next crown might be somebody like Miles or Thorfinn, or somebody that is a little bit more outgoing and jubilant, and so that will work out.
Let's look at your killing tool.
Sure. All right. So I have. I actually just made this. Forgive the lack of strapping tape. I ran out of electrical tape. So my killing tool is a 52-inch longsword. I prefer a minimum stick with the skin on. Speed and maneuverability beats the Mack truck effect. If I can't get the sword there, it doesn't really matter how hard it hits. And I hit plenty hard because I have two hands on the lever. I like about a 14-inch handle. I don't use a thrusting pommel anymore, just because I like the niceness of the looks of the pommel, and it was easier to tune the balance. For quillions, I actually use 7/8 ID washing machine hose. So it's 1.25 inches on the outside. The metal quillions look really pretty, but they're so heavy compared to the rattan that it messes with the way the rattan moves. If I put a big old cast aluminum quillion on here, it won't move like a sword anymore. So this is better. And then I do strips of strapping tape down the sides, and then I do a spiral wrap. And then I use the low profile thrusty tip, and I put the 1.5 inches of foam on there. And then I use a double asterisk of strapping tape, and then a layer of athletic tape, and then electrical tape to keep it on there. I really don't tend to have tips rip off. And usually by the time the tip is ripping off, the sword is dying, because I do like minimal stick. So I just accept that they are disposable, and I go through a stick every month or two, depending how often I'm fighting with the longsword. I have a dead one-hander, because I fight with that. And that is pretty much the same construction. I like a minimal stick, do the straps of tape with the spiral wrap, same thrusting tip construction with the asterisk of strapping tape. And then I do like the plastic basket hilt. It's a 36-inch, pretty standard. But again, I like swords that are fast and maneuverable. I use more of a snappy, sabery style of power generation rather than the punch or push. So I don't rely much on the mass of the stick. I rely on the snap. So most of my swords tend to die out here because I need that tip velocity.
Do you have a trigger on your single-handed sword?
No, I don't do anything weird with my weird. So, like I was saying, I prefer to use my swords like they are the medieval equivalent. And so, if you look at medieval arming swords, they're generally rectangular, almond-shaped handles. There aren't, triggers and things. I put the lanyard on it for legality, but I want it to feel as close to the steel arming swords as I can. So I just follow the same construction shape.
And the handle on your two-handed sword is not carved as much as the handle on your one-handed sword?
The handle on it's I like to go an inch by inch and a quarter, because if I go much thinner, the handle snap because of the way I'm levering in. So I get it as narrow as I can comfortably do it and have the sword not break.
And the little ridges there, is that
That's just for looks.
okay.
It's just spiraled athletic tape to get kind of the rope look, and then I just tape over the top of it. So
Okay.
this is just athletic tape.
Cool. I have to say, I made a two-handed sword like yours with the hose, and it is beautiful. Like the weight is beautiful, it's balanced beautiful. That is a really, really nice hack. Because it looks good too, right? I mean, from a distance, you can't really tell.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I love that. So,
welcome.
All right. So I've had you here for an hour, so probably over an hour now. So why don't we do the final 10?
Okay.
Are you ready? Okay.
Sure.
If you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
Well, right now, everybody. Is it?
It could be anybody. It could be somebody that doesn't fight that you just want to beat up. I don't know. The first person I interviewed said Donald Trump. So.
Oh, well, okay. No, because I always want to fight people that make me feel good. And I would say, I'm just going to say Felix and Eva, because they live in Australia and I get to see them once a year if I'm lucky, and we missed our visit this time because of the quarantine, and I'm always so full of joy when I fight them. I'll say them.
Cool. Who would you like to see reign in your kingdom?
That's a good question. Well, I would love to see my squire, who is on vigil, Big Scottish Fred. I would love to see him do a principality or a crown reign. That would be amazing. I would love to. There are too many people. I can't choose. There's too many.
Okay. If you could talk stick or sword fighting with anyone in the world for an hour, who would it be?
Well, I'm lucky because I get to talk with most of my heroes on a pretty regular basis, and so that's tough because I do spend hours talking stick. But I'm going to say Sir Sagan, because I've never gotten to really talk stick with him, and his legend precedes him, and so many of my heroes consider him a hero, and I never got to talk with him. So
he's an amazing guy. You guys would totally geek out.
Mm.
What is your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
Seven Samurai.
If you could add a rule to the rules of the list, what would it be?
Counted blows, no acted out wounds.
My knees would thank you. What is your favorite tournament format?
Well, so I'm going to say counted blows. The last crown that we ran was a counted blows tournament. So everybody just went to 3 hits. There were no acted out wounds. In terms of the format, I like double a limb. They're quick, there's still pressure, but generally the best fighters make it to the end because you're not taken out by a single fluke thing from anybody. So,
what is your favorite event?
Probably West Ontier War, or Ontier West. The site is beautiful, and Ontier is very close to us culturally, so we have a good time.
If you could have any helmet in the world, regardless of cost, what kind would it be?
I have it. I have a Duke Felix 12-gauge stainless clap-face bassinet it actually has a ducal coronet, and in the spaces between the leaves, it has etchings from the period fight manuals.
Aww.
So that is my dream for every helmet.
Nice. It's Saturday morning at Estrella, and several people want to talk to you about last night. What did you do?
I went to bed early and probably came across as grumpy and antisocial.
Okay. Who is your favorite fight ever?
That's terrible. I
Too
don't.
hard.
It's so hard. Man, I don't know. I've been really lucky. I've had some of those transcendent moments with so many amazing fighters. It would be really tough to pick one.
Okay. And then the bonus question is, who's the cleanest fighter in your kingdom?
So I'm lucky because we have a lot of fighters that are renowned for that. I would say of the really active high-end fighters is probably Duke Miles. He's very, very paranoid about anything that touches him. So even if he's 99% sure that it wasn't good, he'll ask. He'll check in. So I would say we have a lot of really, really clean fighters, but he definitely comes to mind.
Yeah, he's a good guy. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry that I had technical problems and I kept you a little bit long, but I really, really appreciate talking to you. And I thought this was super interesting. So thank you.
Yeah, I had a ton of fun. It was nice to chat with you again.
Yeah. So thanks. And bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.